All right, let's introduce our next speaker. We have Shlomi Raz talking about the last mile, enabling broad access to safe and effective psychoactive drug therapy. Shlomi is the chairman and founder of Eleusis. Since founding Eleusis in 2013, Shlomi has overseen the company's corporate and clinical development efforts. Prior to founding Eleusis, Shlomi was a managing director at Goldman Sachs and began his corporate career at JPMorgan. Shlomi holds a master's from New York University and a bachelor's from Georgetown University. Thank you so much for coming on, Shlomi, and welcome to Psyched.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate the invitation, appreciate the opportunity. Am I coming through clearly?
Yep, you're perfect.
All right, terrific. So let me just share a window. All right, so I think like many of us who have been die-hard attendees at various virtual conferences on psychedelics, we've kind of been hearing the same stories from the same people. And so I thought today would be a good day to mix things up and to talk about the other side of Eleusis. Eleusis is often known as the company developing psychedelics as anti-inflammatory medicines, and that is true. In Eleusis Therapeutics, that is exactly what we are doing. However, we are also very keen on another business, Eleusis Health Solutions, and essentially the development of a care delivery solutions for psychoactive drug therapy. And so today's discussion will be covering that topic. So, psychoactive drug therapy will transform psychiatry. I'm sure this is not news for the people attending this particular conference virtually. There's plenty of evidence supporting the therapeutic potential of these of psychedelics, as well as other psychoactive drugs like ketamine, esketamine, etc. And so the question to our mind is not will psychedelics transform psychiatry, but how? And so Eleusis Health Solutions is very much focused on answering that question, on enabling psychoactive drug therapy to transform psychiatry for the benefit of all mankind. The problem as we see it, and we've been thinking about this for quite some time, Eleusis was founded in 2013, so we're slow, but after about 7 years, we finally kind of figured out what the big problem is. And the big problem is the last mile problem. Essentially, the scale and the scope of the mental health crisis that we currently face across a variety of different indications necessitates delivery of psychoactive drug therapy via the existing care facilities that we have, not the aspirational ones that we wish to build, not the utopian ones that we all have imagined, but rather the reality, which is how do we deliver psychoactive drug therapy through the existing care infrastructure. Now, the reason why this is a problem, of course, is that psychoactive drug therapy requires a specialized infrastructure to ensure safety and efficacy. Whether it's ketamine, whether it's psilocybin, whether it's LSD, or whether it's ibogaine, they all have different requirements, and they all necessitate a specialized infrastructure to support those requirements. And it's not just the training, and it's not just the environment of the treatment room, but it's a whole variety of other variables that surround the delivery of that therapy. The primary bottleneck, of course, is that existing care facilities currently lack specialized infrastructure. We can see that if we cut across all of the existing care infrastructure in the context of psychiatry and wellness. I would argue that wellness is just the primary prevention of mental illness, right? So it should certainly be included in that particular spectrum. So the fundamental issue is that when you come to ketamine clinics, for example, they have the issue of, of either IV or intranasal administration. What's fascinating is J&J thought they had sorted this problem out in terms of care delivery by creating an intranasal formulation with Spravato. What we're finding, though, or what they're finding, is that psychiatrists don't want to deliver it via their existing practices, and existing ketamine providers find it inferior to the IV administration. Substance abuse clinics, for example, are mainly providers of psychotherapy. They don't really have the equipment or wherewithal to deliver psychoactive drug therapy unless they specialize specifically in just that. Hospices are very good at delivering pain medication. They've never kind of moved into this particular domain, which seems obvious. The issue is, how do we enable them to make that transition? Eating disorder clinics, weight loss clinics, etc., same issues. And mental health facilities, for the most part, are either disused electroconvulsive therapy. Some of them have maybe the capacity to do ketamine, but the reality is that most mental health facilities are not equipped to deliver psychoactive drug therapy, nor are wellness clinics. So this is the challenge. How do we enable care delivery via the existing infrastructure? How do we address the safety issues, and how do we enhance the efficacy and cost efficiency of care? The safety is quite clear, right? There are clearly burdensome and expensive requirements to discourage uptake. If you have to fill out a 40-minute long kind of 40-minute time-consuming form every time you treat a patient, right? When you treat them with Spravato, well, you know what? Maybe it's not worth all the hassle. It ties up clinical operations. Furthermore, how do you deal with the fundamental safety issues of psychoactive drug therapy, which I'll address primarily in the presentation today, that are well outside of the normal type of issues that psychiatrists have to deal with? And then secondly, how do you deal with efficacy and efficiency? How do you determine which patients should receive ketamine, should receive psilocybin, should receive LSD or ibogaine? And how do you know that they're going to respond? And how do you convince the insurance company or public health payer that it's worth reimbursing what is likely to be a relatively expensive care? So, the specific challenges, and there's a lot of them, right? So we highlight them here specifically. I won't run through all of them. I've just selected two that I think are relevant for the discussion today. The first problem is patient screening, or a problem is patient screening. And we've seen this in our clinical trials. We've conducted 2 clinical trials with LSD so far, and we know very well the time-consuming nature of patient screening. And if you extend that into the clinic, you're going to see some significant bottlenecks in terms of patient uptake. Right now, for clinical trials, I believe a lot of the screening is simply, have you had a psychotic episode or diagnosed with schizophrenia? Yes, no, right? And if that's the extent of the screening that we intend to move forward into actual clinical use, it's going to have some catastrophic failure. Further, if we have to do structured interviews, or we have to do questions about first and second degree relatives, which may or may not inform on the risk of schizophrenia or psychosis, that's a major issue. So even if we take the human hallucinogen research guidelines put together by Matt Johnson in 2008, and we extend them forward, there are clearly issues just from an operational perspective for implementing these types of guidelines. And the question is, how can we address the bottlenecks, and how can we improve the screening of patients for psychoactive drug therapies? Another example here is therapist misconduct, right? And so there was a very interesting article about sexual misconduct in the context of MDMA clinical trials sponsored by MAPS. There is a lot of truly horrible stories about abuse in ayahuasca rituals from shamans who are abusing their position and abusing the vulnerability of the people who come to them. And so there's a real issue here, because these drugs, psychoactive drug therapies, render the patient vulnerable to suggestibility. They make them vulnerable to kind of being touched without consent. There's a whole host of issues here. And so one solution is to have 2 people as the kind of dyad in the therapist. This is some sort of holdover of Freudian psychoanalytic practice as it relates to, the use of psychedelics. This was really where Johns Hopkins restarted the research, and it was all kind of on the back of research pioneered probably by Sidney Cohen and Betty Eisner back in the 1960s. The issue here is that it's not cost efficient. And if this approach is going to be the de facto standard, we're going to have a very hard time making these therapies accessible broadly to the massive number of patients in need. Further, there are ways to improve, even if you choose that particular approach of a male-female dyad, to enhancing the safety oversight of the particular therapeutic administration. After all, in this particular circumstance highlighted by in the MDMA MAPS situation, there was a male and female therapist. It did not prevent the abuse, and therefore we have to maybe potentially rethink the entire paradigm of how the therapist-patient interactions take place. So all I'm talking about is challenges. Thankfully, we are working on solutions. And so our solution is the combination of digital health technologies and support services, which will enable psychoactive drug therapy delivery that is safe and effective and cost efficient and delivered via the existing infrastructure. This is the Eleusis Health Solutions mission, and I'm happy to report that we've made significant progress towards delivering on this particular mission. In graphical form, and again, visit our website for the kind of motion video. It's very exciting. You can watch it 1 or 2 times, it doesn't change. The idea here is that the platform needs to cover every aspect of the patient journey, from screening and kind of being able to, to be assessed. Am I suitable or not suitable to receive psychoactive drug therapy? Will I have that therapy be reimbursed? Where can I receive that therapy? To the treatment room itself, bringing cutting-edge technologies to the treatment room to assure safety and enhance efficacy. And then on an ongoing basis, being able to predict when someone should come back to be treated and in what modality, and whether or not the same retreatment approach is going to be consistent with the initial treatment, meaning that retreatment may be with a different drug and a different paradigm. That may be the most cost-efficient solution. And so these are the key aspects of what Eleusis is developing, the platform as a service. So the Eleusis care delivery platform as a service is agnostic to drug, agnostic to indication. If it works, it's wonderful. We need to make it safer. We need to make it more effective. The intention of our platform is to safely and efficiently scale the entire diverse ecosystem of care delivery providers, whether it's in wellness, whether it's a ketamine clinic, whether it's a hospice, whether it's in the US, whether it's in the middle of Germany, whether it's in Japan. The idea is we want to be the Cisco of psychoactive drug therapy, the network infrastructure which enables it to scale up through a diverse array of channels. And there are 2 key components to this particular platform: digital health services and support services. The digital health component assesses psychiatric risk factors, treatment suitability, and abuse potential. It selects the treatment paradigm and adjunctive technologies, and it monitors for clinical compliance and psychiatric symptoms. The key point here is that the technologies, the digital health component of what we're developing exists already in proof of principle. And we'll give one example addressing the point I made earlier, which is how do you enhance screening? Well, fascinating, a lot of this capability has already been demonstrated. Mariano Sigmund, in a very captivating TED Talk, describes how his research efforts in concert with researchers at Columbia University and others were able to detect in at-risk youth key aspects of semantic coherence, i.e. how words come together and fit together within free speech, as a predictive mechanism for which of the at-risk youth would likely convert into a schizophrenia. This type of technology, combined with other psychometrics and other types of data, will give us a very good capability to make predictions about the risk of psychosis in an individual. And that data can be captured not just kind of as a retrospective biographical question, but at the current moment when that particular patient is using our platform. Support services are another pillar of the platform. The idea is, how do we help an existing facility get certified, set up the treatment rooms, set up the scheduled drug capacity, set up remote monitoring of the treatment room itself, the training, all the infrastructure. And so along those lines, the solution to the second issue of abuse is a new treatment paradigm. The separation of attendant from therapist. Attendant, someone who attends a particular thing, a psychoactive drug therapy administration. This person may not necessarily be a therapist. This person is there to provide safety and to provide comfort, but this person is not necessarily there to get a full biographical picture of that patient. And what we've observed is that is the most important thing when it comes to administration of psychoactive drugs in the context of psychiatry. Make people feel safe. If people feel safe, then the experience can ultimately be an inward experience. And that's, I think, the true sign of success. The more the attendant is talking, the less likely the outcome will be positive from our perspective. Prohibiting the attendant-patient interactions outside of the treatment room are one way to potentially really create a clear separation between someone who operates in the facility and someone who operates outside. The name Eleusis, the name of the company, was chosen by no accident. Right, there's a long historical record of the importance of treating psychoactive drugs with respect, treating them as sacred, and we believe that these types of restrictions could further the safe use of these compounds. Real-time remote monitoring of treatment sessions. As Buckminster Fuller said, you don't reform the man, you reform the environment. If the environment provides for compliance, if the environment ensures that people will be acting in the best interests of the patients, that they know that someone is looking over their shoulder and making sure that the treatment is being administered the right way, we think that's going to be hugely valuable. Moreover, to train an attendant how to be better at their job, the best training material is actually their performance. And so recording those performances via this remote monitoring provides us an excellent way to provide ongoing education, on-the-job training for attendants throughout the world. And finally, from a regulatory perspective, if we are capturing each particular session and going with an AI quickly through that video session to identify any salient features for reporting, it provides a very convenient way for automated regulatory reporting of the results and conduct of a particular session. And finally, continuing care via telemedicine. We've all learned, sadly, right, how to operate Zoom, how to operate Google Chat, and we've grown accustomed now to most interactions taking place via telemedicine in one, or via, via video, via audio, via chat. And we believe that continuing care is facilitated potentially most cost effectively via this potential path. So in conclusion, we believe that we enable patient access via the existing infrastructure through the platform as a service model. It enhances the safety and efficacy via digital health and support services at the clinic and at home. And we improve the cost efficiency associated with psychoactive drug therapy. We make a treatment more affordable and more reimbursable. And that's the fundamental point here, is that we need to develop psychoactive drug therapy for everyone. And to make it available for everyone, we have to ensure it's safe, we have to make sure it's effective, and we have to make sure it's cost efficient. And our platform is intending to do exactly that. Many other companies are developing new psychoactive drugs, maybe drugs that don't act perceptually, and that's all wonderful. But fundamentally, whether it's psilocybin, LSD, ibogaine, MDMA, you name it, the same fundamental challenges to the last mile, to the delivery of those psychotherapies and those drug-assisted psychoactive drug therapies remain. And only with a platform that solves those particular problems can we really broaden access to these therapies. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions and discuss.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shlomi. We really appreciated it. Yeah, and it's I'm really happy that you decided to take that spin and angle to it, and kind of introduce us to many of the awesome things that you all are working on right now. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, when you see this landscape evolving over the next 10 years, What percentage of people, or what rate do you feel like folks will have their first introduction to psychedelics via these more streamlined types of methods that are possibly provided to them by recommendation through their doctor, through their healthcare system, as opposed through a more recreational or a retreat type experience?
Well, I think you need FDA approval. And so you just look at when the FDA or EMA or relevant regulatory authority will approve that particular drug. And then the question is, what are the risk mitigation systems required for the administration of those drugs? And I think that then fundamentally, once you have a drug approved for an indication, you have the ability to go off label, as has been the case with ketamine, as well as to stay on label. I think that the challenge will be, how do we move from a secondary prevention, right, the kind of treating symptoms. The great challenge, the thing that's really not really well explored, is how do you think about this in the context of wellness? How do you think about this in the context of maintenance therapy, of either preventing relapse, but also, I think quite crucially, for people that are not clinically qualifying for any particular condition, but yet this could be a great therapy for a prevention or for wellness. How do you get that approved? And our current medical system is not really well geared, especially in the context of drugs, to even think about those types of issues.
Do you feel like maybe what we're seeing with this, defunding the police type of movement, that same type of mentality and same type of energy will be soon applied to healthcare, and kind of getting us to the point where we're not just treating symptoms, but we're really treating the root causes of some of these things?
It's interesting. The adverse childhood experience, right, of a sexual or violence or neglect, some sort of, really traumatic event in childhood. If you have more than 3 of those adverse childhood experiences, it predisposes you as an individual to a life of chronic psychiatric, chronic mental health illness, but also chronic inflammatory disease. And so what we think is very fascinating and kind of uniquely have a perspective on is the link between the psychiatric and the immune system. And so fundamentally, to your question, can you see a cure? It gets to this question of, can you alter a setting essentially that was altered in childhood as a clear adaptational approach to stresses of life? That question is a very interesting one, and it's one that we're exploring, and it has a lot of implications inside and outside of psychiatry.
Yeah, we just got a question here asking, what do you think we can learn from ketamine clinics, for good or for ill, about the future of psychedelic therapies?
I think we can learn that there is a desperate need for these therapies. We can learn that using off-label approaches will never really kind of broaden the access to the people in need, especially if this is not just a therapy for the rich, right? But this is a therapy for everyone. I think we can also learn that it's important to do follow-up. It's important to maintain an ongoing rapport with the patient. I think, in recent conversations I've had with people who have gone through the patient journey in ketamine clinics, one of the things that's striking, and it gets to the core nature of the experience of human emotion, is that when you're in a certain state of feeling, like you're happy, you're sad, it's hard to imagine feeling a different way. And so when a patient gains relief from a ketamine therapy, but let's say the effects wear off after 2 or 3 weeks, it's very easy to lose that patient to treatment, right? And to kind of have them fall out of any type of care pathway because they don't even remember the relief that they felt from their kind of drug therapy session. So I think there's both kind of pros and I think there's a lot of learning, both positive and kind of negatives that we can take from ketamine clinics. And I think that really, if you want to create a bottoms-up approach to psychoactive drug therapy, you have to start there.
How do you feel intellectual property plays into the kind of therapeutic delivery model? There are certain companies that are pretty eager to see how they can, patent a combination of a compound in a therapy and the actual delivery. I would just love to hear your thoughts on that entire kind of process and culture of what seems to be bubbling up in the ecosystem.
Yeah, look, I think any IP is very valuable in raising capital, right? You need to be able to raise a lot of money to do anything in the context of life science, right? It's a very expensive field. So then the question is, are you creating value? Have you actually innovated, right? Or are you simply digging a moat, right? That has no value other than keeping others kind of from doing something potentially innovative. And so I believe that if you can create an innovation that truly adds value, then by all means, there should be patent protection. There should be the ability to commercialize that. But it should be innovative. It should really kind of advance, the field. And, I'll let the kind of what's unsaid kind of speak for itself.
Well, what do you feel like the main credentials that are needed for practitioners in this space? We have a question that touches on, shamans having done this for many years, having extensive training, at least in their own methodologies and practices that are maybe based on more indigenous roots and rituals. So what do you feel are like the minimal criteria to being able to say, okay, this is someone who should be working in the clinical context and being able to deliver this type of therapy?
So to deliver the therapy to meet the unmet need, I don't want to make this sound like I'm an ugly American, but I guess I am. You've got to be McDonald's, right? You've got to kind of standardize a process by which you can treat billions and billions and millions of people, right? And so there are a lot of different learnings from kind of traditional use by shamans and others, and we should definitely incorporate those best practices. But fundamentally, treating patients in a hospice in Beaumont, Texas, right, or treating an alcoholic in Boca Raton, Florida, you have to also be culturally appropriate, and you have to be able to deliver it in a way that doesn't really require much modification from culture to culture, geography to geography. And so to that extent, who's the right attendant? Who should be in that treatment room? To our view, it's someone who can instantly build rapport, right, and make people feel safe. And my experience, most psychiatrists, I don't want in the treatment room. I want as far away from the treatment room as possible, right? The people I want in the room, it's that person that I went skydiving with that walked on the airplane with me and wasn't even wearing shoes. And I'm like, oh, if this guy's so comfortable, he's not even wearing shoes, I'm going to be perfectly fine, right? Or the death doula, who is perfectly comfortable dealing with the most intense emotional experiences one could experience, obviously in one's life. That's it, right? That's and so those types of people, I think, are the ideal people to have in those treatment rooms.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us, Shlomi. This was really insightful and wonderful to hear from you. We'll continue the conversation offline. Thank you for joining us again.
Great. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Bye-bye.